Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is ArabTV one more time, and this is your host, Zaid Faransso. With me today for a short talk is a local author. With me is Dario D'Angelo, author of the book, The Bright Side of Death. Well, the title might not be appealing for the first instance, but we will meet the guy and we'll take a look at the book and we'll figure out how this title should make us feel better. Welcome, Dario.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you here with us.
Glad to be here.
So, I just introduced you with the name of the book. And as we hear this name, you'll probably hear it from a lot of people, or you've heard it from a lot of people. The first impression is, why death?
Well, I think it's one of the most undiscussed subjects that happen to, as a society, we happen to have. And that's really was one of my main reasons why I decided to discuss this in a book in particular. But one thing I want to highlight, really the subtitle is a journey into the meaning of life. So it's not really just about that, or it's not in a way a negative story, but just more a way to approach a subject that is quite obscure for most people.
So trying to add a positive side, so to speak, to the idea that most of us think of as negative.
A bright side, yes.
Interesting. Now, this is your first book, I understand?
Yes, that's correct. It's my first book.
Okay. I'll ask you the common questions people usually ask. How did you get the idea? How did the whole theme of the book kind of evolve in your head? And how did that idea translate from just a thought into a full published book?
Well, a few years ago, my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, was diagnosed with a form of cancer, and my wife was deeply affected by the event. And during many long sleepless nights, she was wondering what could have been done different, how she's going to deal with the possible event of her death. And there was all those torturing questions. I tried to answer, and slowly I formed really an idea of what can be said about the subject and how people can learn from our discussions, and maybe having a different approach about either our own death or the death of someone close to us.
So would you say that the book was an answer to a question that have occurred to your own life?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I did what pretty much everybody else does, and this really is not talk about it, not think about it. If it happens, I will try to move on as fast as possible. And while it is a valid approach, it's also a very painful one, because really you cannot put together a philosophy that allows you to overcome this event in a more serene way, with less, if you want, emotional trauma.
But you did quite an extensive research on this topic, and I'll get to that point in a moment. But first of all, I did read part of that book at least, and I can think of a couple of points that drew my attention. One of which is the introduction. It was a well-written introduction. It did introduce the book in a very nice way, and it kind of attracted me to complete more pages within a shorter period of time. Mm-hmm. And in that introduction, the first idea of humor is what really made me think, can we actually write a book about death and yet make it humorous?
That was probably the greatest challenge in writing. I mean, writing itself is very, very difficult. Writing in a good way that is entertaining, and you have the reader that is really engaged with the discussions that you're having with them. But writing with humor is even more difficult, and writing with humor about a subject that is usually, traditionally, very, very serious, very heavy, is even more of a challenge. And I must say, in the beginning, my style was completely different. But then I said, my primary goal was to have fun with it, and I enjoy reading as much as anybody. I still smile and laugh to some of the things that I say. It's a serious subject, but there's also some non-seriousness that can be used to really interpret some of the content, some of the meanings that are discussed.
And I dare say you were kind of or you nailed it in some sense. The other thing that really struck a chord with me was the fact that you put a disclaimer right there in the beginning of the book saying, it's not my industry and I'm not a local American person. And it will be a challenge for me to write such a book, but why not?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I come from, I'm a software engineer by profession. I've been working for the same company for a long time. And really, there is, besides technical publication, there is really nothing that drove me towards writing. I've been a very passionate writer in Italian, but the English language is a very different beast. Even if I've been here for many, many years, really owning the language in a way that you can express articulate thoughts in a very clear way is not particularly easy. It requires a conscious effort. Every sentence has to be reevaluated, and that kind of hindered the creative process, if you want. It's not particularly easy, but it's not impossible, and that's really what drove me, is the ability to have fun with it and try something that I never tried before.
And did you have to, let's say, show the book to more specialized linguistic people, or to get it reviewed by someone, or have it been?
Well, I've been very lucky. My wife has a major in English, so she was able to actually give me most of the tips about, especially small grammar corrections and expressions that are not very common. For the English reader, he will know that I'm not, English is not my first language, but I think it's proper English and properly expressed, and you will not find major, Italian expressions in there.
Definitely. You feel more comfortable writing in your own mother tongue, Italian.
Well, it's definitely something that, I moved in the United States when I was 28 years old, so, Italian is really my language, and I definitely think that writing in Italian would be a lot easier. But English is also challenging and also quite interesting way of expressing yourself. It's different from Italian. Italians usually have a lot of words to describe very simple concept, or even more complex concept. But English wants to have a summarized version. It wants to get to the point in a certain way. They use word location to get to a meaning of a certain sentence. So that was an interesting aspect to discover for me.
Right. Now, I'm going to ask you this question simply because you've taken a long journey, both in geographic senses and in time, to get to the point where you feel more comfortable writing this. And because I've been introduced to this idea so many times, they say that people generally have their intellectual and literary maturation point, where they can think their whole life of writing a book, but at one point, the chord strikes, and you basically find yourself ready to write it. Do you feel that this was what happened with you, or was it the circumstance at the point?
I don't think it was the circumstances. I almost started just because I had some spare time. Actually, it's kind of funny. The reason why it came about is a consequence of an experiment that me and my wife made. We basically decided to discontinue our cable service, our TV service. So really, we had about a month or so, really evenings, quiet evenings, and not having much to do after the first week or so.
Well, that's by no means an invitation for people to discontinue their cable service.
Absolutely not.
Just saying that good things can come out of that.
We actually reinstated it after a month because it was quite difficult. But that gave me the spare time that I needed, and honestly, writing comes very easy to me. I do not need to make a conscious effort to actually come up with an idea. It just comes to me and I start writing about it.
So you do enjoy the act of writing?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it would be impossible to write something, even this short or even long without enjoying it. That's one of the only reason I think I was able to finish it, is because I really enjoy doing it.
All right. And judging by your previous expertise, your trade or the field that you've been working in your whole life, writing hasn't been part of it at all.
No, besides the technical documents, there was never my anywhere close to my job profession, even at school. My major was in physics and in nuclear energy in particular, so there was really nothing even close to to writing or reading literature. Or it was just my personal interest. I always been extremely curious individual. So I've always, read books about, mythology and from Italians and also American literature. I enjoy Shakespeare as much as Dante.
All right. The fact that you wrote a book that is nonfiction, was that easier? Was that more difficult for you? Was the idea to do it this way, or was it more of an inclination to write about literature first, but that just happened?
I think nonfiction is more fun. You really have the space for your imagination to roam free, and a nonfiction book is more something that you have to have researched and analyzed, and you cannot be as casual about making statements, and you have to make sure that what you state is actually not only as a sense but as also as a meaning, and that's really quite difficult to do. So from a writer perspective, I would say for me at least, writing a novel will be a lot easier than writing a book like this.
But we do know that both of them actually involve a lot of researching, a lot of reading, and definitely a lot of verification of your science and historical facts, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And the book in our hands actually involved a lot of it. Basically, a lot of reviews of historical, religious perspectives.
Yeah, the research was really based upon what I learned during my my years of study of Greek mythology, which I'm very passionate about, and also I was raised as Catholic, so the Bible was something that was taught to me from a very early age, and then I try to collect a number of art was also something that I'm very fascinated about. So I try to collect all these pieces of the puzzle and try to put them together in a consequential way that can help explain, at least in the particular chapter I think you're referring to see what is the pattern that we as a society develop to create the idea of that, the innate fear that we develop.
So we're basically embarking into the actual idea of the book at the moment, and from what you just said and from what I read, the point or the theme of the book seems to be that you're trying to tell people that most of the literature, so to speak, most of what we think of death has been evolved over generations.
Yes.
And it's not really what we're supposed to think.
Well, I wouldn't say we're supposed to think. I don't think there is anything that we are supposed to think. But what is true is that a certain idea has been engraved in our cultures, and not just the American one or the Italian one in particular. I think in most cultures, from the Indians in particular, with the god of Kali, to the Greek and the Romans, that has always been created and is depicted in a way that is very fearful, that instigate fear, and that didn't really. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's more an emotional one that you happen to do, and unfortunately, you do it in the back of your mind, and so this fear stays in you from young age to your adult age until you have to face it, and that's really what was striking to me is how much across the centuries there was almost an effort to create this thought, and I find it in a way unrealistic, and in many ways if you read one of the chapters it will be very clear to you. But also in many ways very painful to to accept once we have to deal with the actual event.
All right. So here's what I understand. You mentioned that we're taught the idea. I've heard it, by the way, applying to other fields of life. I've heard it in the form of, we teach our kids to feel afraid.
Yes.
And so our fears reflect on them.
Yes.
Maybe our grief sequence is also taught, in a sense that what we see from our parents and grandparents and
yeah, it's been, like it is a subject that is never discussed, and even parents, it's not something that is they teach them even to their children, even to find ways to negotiate the grieving process, if you want. I think it goes back to really a philosophy of life that is really lacking of the fundamental pillars that really constitute, that really create your ability to negotiate that. I mean, a certain seriousness is applied to the concept, and the kid instinctively fears it. And the fact that it's never discussed makes even more this darkness even more evident in the back of their mind.
And have you noticed practical implications of that in your own story with that?
Oh, definitely. My parents never. When my first experience with the passing of a person close to me was with my grandmother, and I never really had to deal with any event. I was very close to her, and I never had really to deal with any event close to the emotional magnitude. And I really was unprepared. I didn't know what to think, how to feel, and while the first few days, obviously, like for everyone, are pain, there is a way to learn how to negotiate with it and how to really come to terms, and maybe seeing it not necessarily as such a horrible, terrible, and event that has to happen just for the sake of itself, that has a reason, has a meaning.
Well, from my standpoint at the moment, I can definitely relate to what you say, but I'll pick up a word of what you just said, the pain of the moment. Mm-hmm. Do you think that we can voluntarily or consciously make or think in an appropriate manner when we're faced with the actual event, or is it usually the fact that the sadness of the event, the horrific circumstance itself, dictates the way we react instead of our own conscious thinking?
There's a differentiation to make, and this is, I think, can be found true by many people. There is an emotional reaction to the event, and that is something that you cannot control. As I write in the book, it's like being slapped in the face. As much as you intellectually want to not to feel the pain and how to want to get over it, you will still feel the pain. The burning will be there, and you will have to deal with it in some ways. But then after that, there is an intellectual speculation, an intellectual analysis of what happened, and there is where you really can do something about it. Definitely I don't expect or pretend to cure the pain of someone passing from anybody, but at least I hope that I give a perspective for an intellectual analysis that goes beyond the emotional impact and the distress that you feel right after somebody leaves us.
Totally agree with that, and I can see how a lot of people have tried to understand that rather than treat it. We can only claim to research this and study it better and probably give people explanations rather than just solve it, because when it comes to solving it, it's just not possible. We have to give it time. The stages of grief, how much of that have you seen in practice in real life?
Well, I mean, I never really spent too much time analyzing grief. I think there's a natural reaction that everyone lives in different ways, and the relationship you have with a person also determine, no two people that you're close to you love in the same way. They are loved in different ways, and the same applies to grieving them. If they pass, you don't have the same level of emotional reaction, if you want, or I wouldn't call it even a level, I would say the same type of emotional reaction. So I really didn't spend any time investigating the psychological analysis of this type of events. I was more focused on what can we do to intellectually overcome these feelings.
All right. So it's pretty amazing how you jump through the pages from the sadness to the scientific, historical, religious, kind of realistic analysis of the idea, and into the more optimistic side of the story. It's the only inevitable part of life.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
That's absolutely true, and I really, clearly, I think it's clear reading the book or even knowing me is that I do not fear that, and I do not see it like most people or like our culture, the Westernized culture in particular, want you to believe it is. And for me, that is only a part of life, and I mean quite literally, and it's really a return to our origins. And the image that you see in the book cover is really what I see as the continuation of my existence, and not my existence, but the existence of of me as part of the world.
It's like saying it's a bigger image, and our presence
Yes.
and absence is just a trivial incident. It takes place in a few years, which we think as the center of the world, but in the big picture, they're just
Yeah, most of the complexity of this subject comes from the enforcing of the I, the self consciousness, the continuation of what we are as individuals, and the individuals that is named Dario will not exist, but that doesn't mean that Dario, the energy, will disappear. It will always continue to be in this cosmic background that is life.
All right. Is this your only project? Can we see more projects coming? Will they be fictional, non-fictional?
I have a couple of more books that I'm writing. In particular, one is a novel that is titled "The Days to Come," and I hope that with time I will be able to deliver. This was my first goal. My first experiment was, to start and finish something, and the book was an exceedingly difficult challenge at times, but also a very fun experience. So. Having the opportunity, I will probably write more.
So there is something, and do we have the privilege of knowing what setting is that in?
The Days to Come is actually a novel that is basically an exercise of my imagination to see what will happen in the decades ahead. From today till the day I will be 99 years old, and how life and our society changed. And the way I write about it is not just by pure fantasy, but based upon really evidence, and try to project this evidence and the consequences of what is happening on a longer scale, and more as in a personal perspective rather than as a reflection of the society at large. I will not describe, what happened to the entire world, but what would happen to my life as a member of a society, and just like mine experience, others will be very similar in the book, at least.
So we can look at an experiment that is pretty much like the one that we have in hand right now, an experiment that looks at a topic, but within that topic, it looks at life in general.
Yes, I would say there is the similar tone. There is not much philosophy in it. It's more a story, a sort of an adventure in the future, but based on real facts and real consequences of what the choices we make today as a society.
And that definitely gives you the tool that you just talked about, the fact that when you write in fantasy, you have the privilege of moving a little bit here and there and trying to make it more interesting. And
yeah, definitely you can express your creativity, and really fantasy can come to your personal understanding of reality comes to in play, and it's not more historical based, it's more like personal based, if you want.
I believe that will be another book that is worth reading.
Thank you. Hopefully.
Out of this book, which part do you really think that is pretty close to your heart?
In particular, was a chapter that was describing the passing of one of my dearest friend, one of my best friend actually, that I had here in the United States, and a few years ago, and I really wanted to write that because there was, as a mature adult, it was something difficult to put my hands behind it, my hands around it, and I wanted to write about it more than anything. It was for myself and for him, and it wasn't particularly easy, but definitely it gave me, or it helped me to learn from what happened and somehow justify and explain it to myself as something that make it more tolerable and bearable.
All right. So through this, here's an invitation for people who are interested, and the book name is The Bright Side of Death.
Yes.
The author is Dario D'Angelo.
Yes.
Thank you, Dario.
Thank you.
We're pleased to have you with us. We're privileged to be with you in your first step in this world, and we hope to see more and more of this.
Thank you. The book is available on Amazon.com, and I invite anybody to read it, and there is also a Kindle version, and if I do appreciate reviews, so any reviews will be very welcome.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
having you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.